So here we begin the last instruction on the rhythmic synthesis. We're on the level now of the composite rhythm. You remember we began with the elementary rhythm, which united a lift to a fall, two simple pulses by means of that relation of lift to fall. Then we moved to the next level of the composite pulses, which you need to join two elementary rhythms in order to obtain a composite pulse. We saw that, and we saw that the characteristic was a kind of a uniform continuity, a pulsation that goes throughout the piece. Now we move up to the level of the composite rhythm. As we pointed out, it's composite in as much as it takes something of the composite pulse, and its rhythm. It takes the composite pulses and it rhythms them. It shows the relation of one composite pulse to the next. We want to focus first of all on the role of the ictus on each of these levels. Let's go to the manual for that. On the top of page 134, you have an elementary rhythm portrayed. By now, that should be familiar. You have a lift ending up in a fall. Let's concentrate here on the ictus. What is the characteristic of that? Is it a lift or a fall? It is nothing but a fall. The lift is over here, it's a fall. And the ictus marks the fall. Now, down at the middle of the page, we have the representation of the composite pulse. Remember the alternation of day, night, day, night, day, night, which is continuous. We mentioned that in that day-night alternates, the composite pulse corresponds to the civil day, going from midnight to midnight, from ictus to ictus. Now let's take a look at the ictus, the quality of this ictus. Is it a fall? Yes, it's the fall of this movement. Is it a lift? Well, it rebounds. It is a lift that springs up and originates the next movement, which peters out here and springs out another elan to the next fall, elan, fall, etc. Whereas the ictus in the elementary rhythm is only thetic. In the composite pulse, the ictus is arsic and thetic. First thetic, then arsic, the arrival, and then the beginning of another. Now, in the composite pulse, each ictus will be either arsic or thetic, depending on the context. Let's say it again. Whereas in the elementary rhythm, the ictus is thetic. And in the composite pulse, the ictus is first thetic, then arsic. On the level of the composite rhythm, the ictus is either arsic or thetic, depending on the context, depending on the shape of the melody. Let's see how that works out. Going to the board, there are several rules to determine how whether an ictus is arsic or thetic. The first rule is this. You look at the melody. If the melody is climbing, then generally the ictus is arsic. And they look like this. A climbing, a series of arcs looks like that, where the ictus is at the bottom of each curve, a climbing melody. A descending melody is generally thetic. And that looks like this. Likewise, the undulation goes down. The ictus is at the bottom of the curve. There, there, there. So, first two rules depend on the melody. The melody goes up, it's arsic. When the melody goes down, it's thetic. We need another rule which is based more on the text. An accent of a word is generally arsic. So the ictus, when the ictus corresponds to the accent, it's generally arsic. When the ictus falls on another syllable, an atonic syllable, a privative, like amorphic, has no form. Atonic means it's not the tonic syllable. So any other syllable but the tonic. Let's take a look just to make sure we understand that. Take a word like teriat. Where's the accent? Teriat. There's the accent. This is accentuated syllable here. These are the atonic syllables. Basically, anything besides the accent. So, when the accent corresponds to the ictus is arsic. When it doesn't, when the ictus falls elsewhere in the word, generally speaking, it's thetic. The last rule is a rule that derives from the general nature of movement. When you begin something, you need some go to get going. When you end something, you need to come to a halt. What do you think that means? At the beginning of a piece, it's always arsic. That first, you have to begin with an arsis. Otherwise, you can't begin. You have to go in order to begin a movement. And at the end, it's not possible to end on an arsis. That would be like jumping in the air and staying in the air. You have to end on a thesis, which is a rest. Corresponding to that, the summit of the piece, that is, the composite pulse, which contains the highest note of the piece, will be arsic. So let's look at those rules again, summarize them once more. First rule, melody climbs, it's arsic. Melody descends, thetic. Arsic, see this, that's the Greek word, that's the alpha, and that's short for arsic, arsic. And this is a theta, which is the first, that corresponds to, in English, to a th, the th of thetic. Third rule, based on accentuation, accent, ictus on accent, generally arsic. Ictus on atonic syllable, generally thetic. Okay? So, two rules for the melody, one rule for the accentuation, and one rule for simple general rules for movement. Beginning, arsic. End, that is the very end. The very beginning has to begin with an arsis. The very end has to end with a thesis. And the summit, that is the composite pulse containing the highest note, is obligatorily, necessarily arsic. There you go. Take a picture of that with your cell phone, or just memorize it. Okay? Let's look at page 136 now and read a summary of what we have said about the arsis and thesis. An arsis signifies most often a melodic elevation, an increase of intensity, and an acceleration in tempo. Dom Guijard used to say that an arsis is a crescendo of soul which comes out musically. A thesis signifies normally a melodic descent, a decrescendo in intensity, and a slowing of tempo. The next thing we have to do is to show how we join one composite thesis, one composite rhythm to another. Let's go to the board to do that. First of all, we want to take a look at the basic unit of a composite rhythm. Composite rhythm involves an arsis and a thesis. This is the arsis, and this is the thesis. And each component comprises a composite pulse. 1, 2, 1, 2. And that would be the division between the two. That's not a measure bar, that's a division. So 1, 2, 1, 2. Arsis, thesis. That's your basic unit. Now, those basic units can be joined in 3 ways. The first way is by juxtaposition. That is, you place one alongside the other. By juxtaposition then, arsis, thesis, arsis, thesis. Arsis, thesis, arsis, thesis. That's by juxtaposition. The next way of joining composite rhythms is by arsic fusion. Arsic fusion simply means that there's several RCs in a row. So you have an arsis, arsis, arsis. Arsis, arsis, arsis. Where the ictus comes there, arsis, arsis. Whereas you see this is an arsis, thesis, an alternation. Here, several arsis in a row, loops, and goes up in that general direction. It mounts. Whereas the third possible way is by thetic fusion. That is, several theses in a row. Let's take 3 theses in a row. 1, 2, 3. It's by undulation, as we saw before. Ictus, 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 thesis. No. Thesis, thesis, thesis. Okay? So, juxtaposition, arsic fusion, thetic fusion. This all leads us up to a definition of composite rhythm, which was a kind of a test that, to make sure that we know what we're talking about. What is composite rhythm? Let's look to the manual. On page 137, you have the definition here surrounded by the blue box. Composite rhythm is constituted by the relation of composite pulses between themselves in function of the entire music phrase. The entire musical phrase, sorry. Now, I'm afraid that you don't quite grasp right off the import of that definition. Okay, let's try and underline the important aspects of that. Composite rhythm, what is it? It's constituted by the relation. It is a kind of relation. Now, what else was a relation? Do you remember? An elementary rhythm. Let's look at the definition of the elementary rhythm. Page 104. The elementary rhythm is the relation established by the intelligence between 2 sounds, one on the eland, the other on the rest. So, like the elementary rhythm, the composite rhythm is a relation. What do we conclude from that? Rhythm is a relation. When you're talking about rhythm, you're talking about a relation. Something mental, something that's in the either visible or audible, yet the intelligence is what perceives it. Composite rhythm is a relation. It's constituted by the relation of composite pulses. Elementary rhythm, page 104. Elementary rhythm is the relation established by the intelligence between two sounds, two primary pulses. One on the elan, one on the rest, on the fall. What is composite rhythm? It's a relation between not primary pulses, but composite pulses. You take binaries and ternaries and you establish a relationship between them. So we're on a higher level. Good. And in function of the entire musical phrase. Now what does that mean? That means that the context is what determines whether that ictus is that is the composite rhythm, which is compacted into that ictus. The ictus commands that whole composite rhythm. Whether that composite rhythm is arthic or thetic, we know that by the context. Now the context, how do you evaluate the context? You evaluate it by the 4 rules that we went through before. The 2 melodic, climb or descent. The 1 on accentuation, the accent gets the ictus. And then the 3rd one, the beginning, general movement principles, beginning, arthic, end, thetic. Those 4 rules are suffice to evaluate the context and assign or evaluate the context of the musical phrase and say what relation the composite pulses have in function of that musical phrase. So there we have everything. And we can sum up everything on the board. You have an arsis and a thesis. You can, on the one hand, take a primary pulse and relate the arsis to the thesis. We'll put it up a little bit higher. Arsis, thesis. And we'll kind of draw a separation line between the 2 phases. And this level here, establishing a relation between 2 primary pulses, is called the elementary rhythm. When you take composite pulses, what are they? Either binary or ternary groups. Let's take a binary group here and a ternary group here. You relate them by a relation, arsis, thesis. You see, you take an element of time, either a primary pulse or a composite pulse, and you relate them by means of the rhythm, by means of an arsis thesis, giving an elementary rhythm, or an arsis thesis on the level of the composite rhythm to make the composite rhythm. We now turn to the book for an example of the complete rhythmic synthesis, the Salve Regina, or at least the beginning of the Salve Regina. Here on page 137, you have first of all the text on the bottom, Salve Regina, Mater Misericordiae. You have the melody for the simple tone, syllabic, as we saw, with the counting above it. One corresponding to the ictus, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Above that, you have the elementary rhythm, you see, which are described as a series of lifts and falls. Lifts and falls, and this one is prolonged to signify that there's a third beat that is comprised under the fall. It's not prolonged in order to signify that there's a third beat, but you see 2, 1, 2, and then the third beat here is on the rise. So you have to prolong over the 2 here. The third beat is on the rise, and you're down onto the downbeat. 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. The composite pulse looks like a series of loops, which are always the same amplitude, but are continuous. However, when we get to the composite rhythm, we assign arsis here, arsis. See, this is a looping, and then undulations here, and here you have a juxtaposition, a thesis joined to an arsis, thesis. Look at the way the shape changes. You can see more what's going on. An arsis meaning an increase of energy, of intensity, and thesis, a decrease. So you have a basic shape of up, down, and then a tiny little up again, and then down. One thing you ought to, again, notice about this is that all the ictus line up. If you draw a vertical line down through, it goes through the ictus, through the 1, through the ictus marked here, through the very bottom of the curve of the composite pulses, and through the initial ictus here. Same here, etc. Kind of gives you a model for your homework assignments. A last question then, what level is most adequate for expressing the rhythm or the general shape of the melody of a Gregorian chant? Is it the elementary rhythm? Well, the elementary rhythm is a series of stops and starts, lift, fall, lift, fall, lift, fall. If you were going to express the rhythm of a chant like that, you would basically have something that's cut up into sections. That's really not what chant is about. There's one, a chant is one, huh? It makes one thing. You could take the composite pulse level, but in that case, all you have is a succession of loops which are completely uniform and horizontal. You don't see the development. You can see a pulsation, yes, which continues throughout, but you don't see the growing intensity and waning intensity. It's only with the composite rhythm that you see, by means of the succession of arses and theses, where the melody is going up towards a summit and then decreasing from that summit and finally coming to rest on the final thesis. The composite rhythm also includes all the other rhythms with it, inasmuch as each ictus marks the pulsation going through, but it adds another dimension. If you like, on the middle level, the composite pulses, you have simply horizontal representation, whereas there's a certain verticality, a certain amount of shape that takes place, that takes is expressed in the curve of the composite rhythm. We'll see that more and more as we get more practice in that. Let's read a summary of that in the book. The book summarizes that right at the end of the lesson when it says, it is easy to see that this last level of the rhythmic synthesis, while assuming the two previous ones, corresponds adequately to the expression of Gregorian chant. It corresponds adequately to the expression of Gregorian chant. So we're going to have to get some practice in that. The exercises that you're given for this lesson involve nothing new. We've done the rhythmic gesture last time. Again, if you want to do with both hands, you're going to have to find something that holds the book at about that level so that you have both hands free. Otherwise, you can hold the book, your Liber or your gradual, at this level and use one hand to do your rhythmic gestures. The written assignment 8 is on the communion Ecce Virgo. You're accustomed to analyzing in 4 columns. You have a little bit of a difficulty there on a quilismatic group, but that difficulty is not insurmountable after what we did, the exercises that is at the end of lesson 4 on the quilismatic groups. Remember to separate the group just before the tooth note, then look at what follows the tooth note. What is that in terms of a normal neum? Then put quilisma. And then you put what's before the separation, punctum, plus whatever that quilisma, whatever it is, forming a group. For the excursus this time, you have Dom Gajard, another portrait, another biography. He's the choirmaster of Salem from 1914 to 1971, very long time. He's the one that brought the choir of Salem, where the chant was restored. At least much of the work for the restoration of the chant was effectuated. He's the one who brought the execution of the chant to really a perfection. Learn about the life of this really likable monk in this excursus. So there we are. We finished our review of the rhythmic synthesis, starting with the elementary rhythm, composite pulses, composite rhythm. There we would be able to, we've kind of stopped at the foot of the mountain because we haven't actually got practice in assigning arsis and thesis to according to the melodic context. We will get to that though in a subsequent chapter, lesson 14 on chironomy. For now, we have to move on to other things because we're assuring the basics. The next 2 instructions, we're going to move on to the text. We have 2 things to do to make ourselves competent with regard to the text in order to sing rightly Gregorian chant. The first thing is to learn how to pronounce the Latin, and then the second thing is how to accentuate the Latin word. Accentuate, that is, there's a current of accentuation that passes through the word. We're going to have to detail that, see exactly how that works out. So you can see that we're not quite out of rhythm yet. That rhythmic theory will be applied to the rule, to the word, in order to elucidate the current of accentuation. So next chapter then, the pronunciation of the Latin word.